So the move for Ghanaian forward Ibrahim Osman looks to be breaking down. The reason for it breaking down is an advisor to David Sullivan has apparently been in his ear and said, "Oi, you, this guy is a bit of a risk, particularly at this money. I'm not sure he can cut it in the Premier League." How do we know this? Well, we know this because there's a bit of a he said, she said, which is a remarkably difficult thing to say, actually. Bit of a tongue twister, that one. It's happening on social media. Sean Weston, West Ham Football, sort of broke the story, and almost immediately afterwards and underneath, the first reply is ex-West Ham United employee saying it's an agent that you know well who has his own best interests at heart. So Sean's saying, "Oi, someone's putting the board off buying this player." And X is saying that someone is someone you know, Sean, and he's doing it for selfish reasons. So I mean, it's a juicy story, right? It's a really, really juicy story. Look, does X know who it is? Well, of course he does. Does Sean know who it is? Of course he does. Do I know? I have my suspicions, that's for sure. But I think for legal reasons, probably not best not to say it at the moment. But there you go. X is saying it's an agent. I'll let you come to your own conclusions on there. So what do we make of this? What does this mean? Well, I guess, first of all, what we've got to do is try and balance up how much we think David Sullivan is going to listen to this advice. Now, I can tell you something here for a fact. West Ham have signed 2 players who this particular agent said, "Oi, don't sign them." So clearly the advice is not always listened to. It's just whether we will listen to this particular advice. So let me just say from the outset, I don't think this means that we definitely don't sign him. Now, what I've also got to do, though, is try and remain true to what I said in the past week, the past 2 weeks, which is I think this is a massive risk. So I can't be utterly disgusted with what I'm seeing here, what I'm hearing. I can't sort of feign offence at this and surprise, because I think it's a big risk. I said this over the last few days to go and buy a young player. So his first move to Europe, and he's playing in the Danish league, and I think his first big move is for £18 million plus a big sell-on fee. That's a lot of money. That's far higher than the money that these players usually go for. I remember we signed a Haksabanovic from one of the Swedish clubs. He was £3.5 million. That's sort of more like it. When you're approaching £20 million, you sort of want someone that can definitely hit the ground running. Not be a world beater. Maybe they will grow. But we want a good player. And I'd sort of make the point that Jared Bowen was £20 million. Abir Eze, who we were looking at when he was at QPR, was £20 million. That's the sort of thing. So we just don't know how good this kid is. So I think it's... The fact that it's a risk, I think that's kind of obvious anyway. It's just how much we want to take a punt. And then you've got the dynamic of what's going on here. So at what point are you going to trust whoever's recommended it? We're gonna have to assume that 2 and 2 makes 4 on this one, and assume that this is somebody that Tim Stiedten has recommended. So Tim Stiedten said, look, this kid, he's going to be a big player. He's going to be a really, really good player. We need to go and sign him. So at what point are we going to sign him? But also, at what point is this punt money? Because I think a director of football should be allowed certain money to go and reinvest. But what I would say is it is quite a lot of our budget on this one. And look, I've mentioned for the last few days that I've said this. I'm not going to backtrack. I think even if we got this guy in and we were to get Jota in, old George Michael, you Jota have faith, which is not my gag. Somebody wrote that in the comments yesterday. It's a brilliant one, by the way. Jota, for me, would get in the team far quicker because he's more ready. Now, you might remember a couple of weeks ago, we did a transfer roundup. We discussed a guy called Jonathan Rowe. We did it the day after he scored that wonderful goal for Norwich. He looks to be an amazing player as well. And I think if Jonathan Rowe's 25 million and this guy is 80 million with add-ons, which takes it to 25 million, again, I would probably go with Jonathan Rowe. I really would. So... For me, do I want to take a punt on this player? Yes, I do. Do I want it to eat up all of the transfer budget for January? No, I don't think so. I think it'd be really good to have an effective winger who could hit the ground running. And I just wonder if the whole deal has just become a little bit rich. And I do think, it's like when we signed that, Alvarez, we signed him from Silkeborg, if you remember. Again, it was about £3.5 million. If it doesn't work out, it's not a massive problem. So I'm not getting overly upset about this. I'm less upset about the player and more concerned about the dynamic of the club, if that makes sense. The fact that I worry that a director of football has highlighted somebody and said, I want this guy, but then maybe the chairman is having an agent whisper in his ear saying, don't buy this guy. That's not healthy for the club. That's too many cooks. That really is. And I don't like it. But what I want to do is separate that, which I think is unhealthy, from the player. Because I think you just get long in the tooth with this stuff, don't you? I remember when we were after that. I remember Abdullah Sima, and he was at it was either at Slavia Prague or Sparta Prague. Possibly Slavia. I think it was at Slavia Prague. And we had to have him. We had to go and get this guy. He was brilliant. He was the next big thing. And we didn't get him. And there was a lot of upset. There was an outcry on social media when we didn't get this guy. And look, he's not done anything. I think is he at Rangers at the moment? But did he go to Stoke? Or did he go to... Maybe he went to Stoke and into Brighton. Something like that. But I think my point being, irrespective of where he went, I don't look at this guy and think, oh, damn, we really missed out there. But there was an outcry when we didn't get him. Because he was a risk. And we decided not to at the time. So I think it's easy to look at the players that we miss out on and get disappointed or get annoyed with anyone. It could be David Sullivan, could be the agent, could be David Moyes. It was David Moyes that was responsible for not pushing that Simmer move through. But it looks wise now with the benefit of time, with hindsight. It looks like wisdom, doesn't it? Keane Lewis Potter. He was another one, wasn't he? A couple of seasons ago, and we were really, really looking to push that through, and it didn't happen. And I actually think he's an all-right player. But I'm not looking at Keane Lewis Potter now and thinking, we missed out. It was 20-odd million, if you remember. Everyone was saying he was the next Jared Bowen. He's not, is he? I mean, he may well turn out to be reasonable value for the 20 million in time, but he's not the next Jared Bowen. You're not looking at a 20 million player who's become a £70 million player, perhaps like Jared Bowen has, one of the top goal scorers in the Premier League. No, you're not dealing with the same thing. So I'm trying to separate the outcry of, we know this is typical West Ham, we've missed out on this player, it's disgusting. I'm trying to separate that, the individual player himself, with something that I think is an unhealthy situation at the club. Because I think the transfer committee is bloated anyway, let's put it that way. So what's the transfer committee? David Moyes, Tim Stiedten, Mark Noble and David Sullivan all sit round and decide upon a player. Whilst I have my reservations about how good the player is, and I do think he's a risk, and I would rather spend 20 million somewhere else at the moment, I do think if everyone has sat round that table and said, OK, we all agree, let's go and get this one. So let's assume that's happened. Just for a moment, let's assume that they've gone and done two things. OK, what we're going to do, we're going to get a player for Moisey in Calvin Phillips, and then we're going to go and get one of Tim's picks. Here he is. Does everyone agree? Yes, everyone agrees. Let's assume for a moment that's happened. It might not, but let's assume it. And then, so we then go and start negotiating for this player. And then what happens is an agent gets in the ear of David Sullivan and says, I'm not sure about this. Well, doesn't that undermine the whole process? I don't think that's good. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Now, none of it might be true, which is one of the... and I don't want to get in trouble, which I don't particularly want to name the agent. And I think it might be, maybe, just maybe... Let's be fair, we don't know that he's absolutely brilliant. We don't know this kid's fantastic. I made the point, when we first linked to him, people were saying he's Kudus Mark II. And I said this on a video, well, hold on a second, he doesn't score, he doesn't shoot like Kudus, and he's nowhere near as strong. But he travels with the ball really well. That's a hell of a comparison. I think the comparison is only because he's Ghanaian. That's the only comparison. And he came through the, the Right to Dream Academy in Ghana or something like that. From the same academy. He doesn't share that many attributes with Kudus as a player. And the attributes of the shooting and the strength and the work rate are exactly what have allowed Kudus to flourish in the Premier League. So as I say, I'd go with Jota because he looks like George Michael. Look, half of that's a joke. Before I don't want. Please. It's been a bad week. I don't want somebody in the comments saying Gonzo, you can't sign a player just because he looks like George Michael. I'm not. It's a joke. Most of this stuff is not to be taken seriously. I'll just probably make that point. I would sign Jota. My first choice would be Jonathan Rowe. I think looking at it, he looks like the next. It's a bad moniker, isn't it? The Jared Bowen, the next Jared Bowen, but he looks like it more than anyone else, And so I think this would be a really, really good one. I prefer Jonathan Rowe over Jack Clarke. I really would. And I think here's the point. They're all, not Jota, but all of those other players are all a similar amount of money. They're all about £20 million-ish, give or take a few million. Hey, what's a few million between friends? And I think that's the point. I think some of them immediately go on the bench and come on. You know, if David Moyes bought Jack Clarke, he's playing. I assume, and I don't mean he goes straight into the first team. He comes on the bench and David Moyes uses him, right? I think the same with Jonathan Rowe. I worry about this. I call it, sort of like Wellington Paulista syndrome, really. You get this guy in, and maybe David Moyes just doesn't want to use him at all, or doesn't trust him. I think what would be a real travesty. And I do think there's a likelihood that Pablo Fornals leaves, but what would be a real travesty, actually, for the player and for West Ham, is we sign this winger, and I'm talking about Osman here, and he comes in, and Pablo Fornals still plays ahead of him at left wing when we need a left winger, when sort of Moyes' favourite 11 aren't available. I think that would be a shame, and I don't want to see that happen. So for that reason, I'm not too bothered if it falls through. What I am concerned about is the manner of it falling through, and that is far more concerning than losing the player itself. Anyway, I'd be very interested to know what you think in the comments below. What do you think? Are you bothered? Do you really want this guy? Do you want this guy more than Jonathan Rowe, more than Jack Clarke, more than George Michael? Maybe you do. Maybe this is your choice. Maybe this is the guy that you really want. But yeah, it could be interesting. The other thing I just want to say, I just want to perhaps make this point. We heard towards the end of last season there was a lot of mischief making. Sorry, not the end of last season. Towards the end and the middle of the last transfer window, there was a lot of mischief making about Tim Stiedten. He didn't get on with David Moyes, and they almost came to blows. You remember that one? I did the article on it. They picked up the article, almost punching each other. I mean, and it all turned out to be nonsense. Actually, it was cohesive. The club did have a strategy, and it's what allowed them to bring in the 4 players that they brought in. So I think all of this stuff has to be taken with a pinch of salt. It really does. But what I would say is, look, Sean's got really good links with West Ham in and around boardroom level. Ex-West Ham United employees has got really good contacts in amongst sort of coaching staff and on the training ground and things like that. So I'm not suggesting these guys make it up, but I do think there is a certain amount of stirring of the pot. Because I don't think this is it, by the way, but I'm saying I think there's because I think that's more an anti-Moyes agenda, and I think a lot of the stirring of the pot goes on with that. I don't think this is an anti-Moyes agenda, what we're seeing with this story here, which probably makes it a little bit more worrying, because there's no smoke without fire. I don't think there's really any smoke here in that sort of sense. So it's really difficult to sort of pick your way through it and work out what's the truth and what's not. I guess time will tell. What is not healthy, though, is getting towards, what is it now? Is it the 28th of January? And now we're having second thoughts. If we were going to have second thoughts, they should have been done a long, long time ago. I would really like us to get a player over the line. So I think that would be the worst of all things. Osman comes in, fine. Jota, fine. Jonathan Rowe, fine. To not leave yourself with enough time because you've had a bit of squeaky bum on the 28th of January when the transfer window's going to close in 3 or 4 days. I kept on saying, I think I was saying, whatever, the 30th, the 31st. I think it might be the 1st. But whatever. We were so close to the end of the transfer window. If your indecision means you lose out on a player, I think that's pretty crappy. Pretty crappy running of the club at the top end, I have to say. So hopefully we get this sorted.